Welcome and thank you for joining us. I am Heidi McCutcheon of the Shelton-Mason County Chamber of Commerce. Incorporated in 1922, the Chamber is the oldest and largest business organization in Mason County. Today we have nearly 400 members and represent nearly 6,000 employees across Mason County. We are pleased to partner with the North Mason Chamber, Mason Web TV, powered by Hood Canal Communications, to bring you the 2020 Candidates Forum. So welcome. It's my pleasure to introduce Dan Griffey and Colton Myers, both candidates for 35th Legislative District, Position 1. So welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you, Heidi. Happy to be here.
Thank you. Thank you, Heidi.
My pleasure. So we'll begin with your introductory statements. You'll each have 2 minutes. And Dan, we will begin with you.
Thank you, Heidi, and thanks so much to the Chamber for putting on this forum. Again, my name is Dan Griffey. I currently serve as your legislator in the 35th District, Position Number 1. I'm a lifelong resident of the district and was brought up by a family of people that gave more to others than they gave to themselves. And I've taken that service above self to an extended degree, serving as a volunteer firefighter from the age of 16 on, and a professional firefighter when I turned the great age of 20. My whole 49 years have been here, spend almost all of it in the giant city of Allen. I currently serve as the House Republican Whip. It's the guy that marshals the votes and marshals people to vote, basically. We manage people as the whip, serve as an elected member of House Republican leadership. I serve on the local government, public safety, and early childhood education and learning committee. They changed the name, so I don't remember the new one, but children, youth, and families, so I can't remember. And by the way, the reason my video is not on is because we're having technical difficulties of figuring out how to get the video to show up on my electronic device. And with that, I thank again the Chamber for your facilitating this forum, and look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Colton, you'll also have 2 minutes to introduce yourself.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Heidi, to the Chamber of Commerce and to the residents tuning in today. I'm fortunate to be here with you. My name is Colton Myers. I'm running for State House 35th District Legislative Seat, Position 1. The reason I'm running is simple. For too long, our district has been left behind and taken for granted by ineffective leadership. When you look at the outcomes and the challenges facing our district today, by virtually every metric, we are falling behind. 1 in 4 children are growing up in poverty. Our socioeconomic outcomes rank in the bottom of the state. Our public school districts recently announced millions of dollars in budget cuts, and our health access outcomes rank near the bottom of the state. All of this was before a global health pandemic, and we're facing pandemics and challenges on many fronts, from a recession unlike none seen since the Great Depression to the global health pandemic and the centuries-long pandemic known as systemic racism. I am running for this seat because I bring the professional, lived, and educational background to be an effective legislator. I'm a 3rd-generation district resident. I grew up in the Kitsap County portion of the district. I now live in Thurston County, so I've traveled the corridor. I'm a proud graduate student with my master's in public policy from the University of Washington, so my decisions in the legislature will always be informed by evidence-based practices, not partisan politics. And lastly, I'm a senior health policy analyst working for the largest state agency, Washington State Healthcare Authority, where I'm working to better integrate SUD services across this state. I believe that our community has been left behind, but I also believe in our potential to bring people together and build us up together. That's why I'm running, and that's why I'm humbly asking for your support today and look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Colton. We'll now move into some of the questions that the Chamber has prepared for you. As Dan began with his introduction, we'll hear from Colton first on this portion. Colton, you'll have 1 minute to answer the question. Dan, you'll then have a minute to answer the same question. And Colton, as you responded first, you'll have 30 seconds to wrap up or respond if you so choose. So with that, the first question is, COVID-19 has initiated an exodus from urban areas, and we are seeing extensive build out of existing vacant lots across Mason County. How do you view this growth, and how does the current Growth Management Act appropriately address growth in rural areas? Colton, you'll have 1 minute to answer.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Heidi. I just want to start off by saying I'm very proud to know several of the folks who are actually working on studies for the Growth Management Act, some of my fellow alums from the Evans School. What I do know and can speak of with the Growth Management Act is certainly it needs modifications. We've seen a lot of changes and challenges facing Mason County, from housing affordability to our growth. There are certain components of the Growth Management Act that I certainly agree with. I think that there's elements built into the Growth Management Act that help make sewage costs and public utility costs lower. But I also think that we need to be smarter about our density planning. As you said, COVID-19 has certainly presented an exodus from urban areas, but we have to be mindful too that housing affordability and the housing crises is not just a Seattle-made problem. It's here in Mason County, it is here in Shelton, and we need to be doing more to mitigate it and be proactive about it instead of reactive about it.
Thank you, Colton. Dan, you'll now have one minute to answer as well. And Dan, if you'll double check your microphone.
All right, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Heidi. The Growth Management Act very negatively impacts rural communities because it places the burden on rural communities to be the recreational areas, if you will, for the urban centers. And the biggest problems with the Growth Management Act is misinterpreting the act by our elected officials and appointed officials at the state level. In the preamble to the Growth Management Act, difference was supposed to be paid to rural communities with regard to economic activity. When my opponent talks about the housing affordability and shortage, we have plenty of land. We are not land poor. We are zoning poor because of the restrictions of the Growth Management Act. I passed a piece of.
Thank you, Dan. Colton, you'll now have 30 seconds for some final thoughts on the matter.
Absolutely. Well, to that, I said very clearly that I agree the Growth Management Act needs some modifications to it to be smarter about rural planning, density planning in our communities. But there are also elements that are beneficial, including lowering the cost of utilities. And as Dan is a local firefighter, he should know as well that the Growth Management Act actually saves local dollars for fire authorities. So again, it saves local dollars, but it does need modifications, and we need to be smarter about our density planning with housing in particular.
Thank you, Colton. Dan, you'll have the opportunity to answer this question first, and you'll have 1 minute. That question is, schools in Mason County started the year fully online, which has made many of the households painfully aware of the deficits in broadband connectivity. How can we address this, and what is Washington State's role in crafting a solution?
Yeah, thank you, Heidi, for the question. There are many ways that we can address what we call the last mile or the last 5 mile problem. The number one way is we can continue to fully fund the broadband office that's offering grants and low interest loans to do the build out to our rural communities. The other thing that I'm working on is to suspend the pole access or contact fees for the last 5 miles for 5 years to promote private sector investment in that build out. Now that is somewhat controversial, but if our local utilities are not collecting the taxes already, I don't think it hurts to do a suspension for an incentive to invest in that broadband build out. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Colton, you'll have 1 minute to answer the question also.
Sorry, I was muted there for a second. Thank you, Heidi. Well, I'm proud to say my little nephew just started kindergarten this year, and I've seen the challenges that face his teachers and the people that are having to work under these incredibly stressful conditions, and I give them my utmost respect to the challenges that they're facing. Look, This speaks to the broader challenges that I spoke to the 35th District. It should not have taken a global pandemic to realize that we have a broadband connectivity issue here in the 35th District. We should have been proactive about this, not reactive about this. I personally support the idea of broadband as a public utility. In my current profession at HCA, we are already talking about what the state's role is in expanding broadband connectivity. And quite frankly, I believe it's going to take a broad coalition of supporters, bringing the healthcare authority together when we talk about expanding telehealth medicine, and bringing other agencies together in looking towards a way in which we can expand broadband, make it a public utility, and realize it as an essential service as it so is.
Thank you, Colton. Dan, you have 30 seconds for final thoughts on the matter.
Yeah, so we have taken it very seriously. As a matter of fact, through the grants that I supported, our PUD3 was able to, and I am a major supporter of our public utility districts, especially those in Mason County. The PUD3 was able to do a major expansion to large swaths of the district, and I have been working on this issue, but the issue is a very big issue, and it's going to take a little time to get up and fixed.
Thank you, Dan. Colton, you will have the opportunity to answer the next question first. And that is, the Chamber's mission includes our work to maintain a vibrant business community and to facilitate economic development. Can you please describe specific actions you would take as a legislator to help us meet our mission? Your answer should include what legislative actions you believe are needed.
Absolutely. Thank you, Heidi. There are two things I immediately think of. One is we need to support our private sector and work on our partnerships. My good friend Jim Morrell, who is part of the Peninsula Credit Union, one of the only CDFIs in the region, has done a lot of great work with building economic capacity, economic mobility, and building social capital for people in our community that are economically distressed. That's one area where I hope we can work together. And certainly we need to be working with our federal partners too to guarantee more funds for our CDFIs, to guarantee more funds so that people can start up businesses in rural communities that are economically distressed and often left out of the decision-making table. To that, I will also say we need to have a labor agenda for our people. Facts have shown that when you raise wages, when you support collective bargaining rights, when you improve workplace standards and prevailing wage standards, everybody succeeds. And it's unfortunate that my opponent has routinely voted against collective bargaining rights, voted against raising the minimum wage. We create economic opportunity when we improve lives for everybody.
Thank you, Colton. Dan, you'll now have 1 minute to answer the same question.
Well, thank you so much. As always, my opponent doesn't know me or what I do when it comes to labor unions, and I've been a chief champion and supporter and endorsed by many of them. However, when it comes to what we can do for our local businesses and to see them thrive is we need to have long-term low regulatory rates and low tax rates. I support, and my seatmate and I have been looking at a flatter business and occupation tax, but it needs to be, the taxes and regulations need to be low and predictable in the future. The state of Washington is a change state. We change regulations so fast that it costs our businesses an exorbitant amount of money to comply with every change that they make every calendar year. So restraint on those regulations, and so they can be profitable in the future. It's not about capital to start a business. It's about what it costs to do business. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Colton, you'll have 30 seconds for final thoughts on the matter.
Thank you, Heidi. Two quick points. One, my opponent talks about lowering taxes, but as recently as 2018, he voted against lowering your property taxes here in Mason County. And as we know, property taxes are already exorbitant in Mason County. Number two, all you have to do is look at his record on labor. He has a record, you can view it. He has a failing grade for labor unions, which is why I'm proudly been endorsed by the Washington State Labor Council, the Washington Federation of State Employees, which make up a vast array of our workers here in Mason County, Thurston, and Kitsap, as well as the UFCW that covers places like Mason General. And I'm proud to be the labor candidate.
Thank you, Colton. The final question that the Chamber has prepared for you, Dan, will have you answer this first. And that question is, what is one policy requirement or initiative that you would immediately revoke or institute given the chance? You'll have 1 minute for your answer.
One policy? Oh my goodness, this is crazy. There's too many things. that I could answer. I would have to say when it comes to representing a rural community is suspending the Growth Management Act and keeping the zoning requirements in place along with the protections for our critical open spaces for Mason County and most of the 35th. That would help a lot.
Thank you, Dan. Colton, you'll have 1 minute to answer the same question.
Thank you, Heidi. One policy that I'm very proud of that we've kind of tested but not implemented fully in Washington State is the idea of a children's savings account, or baby bonds as they're referred to in other states like Nevada. They build social capital, they build economic mobility for children, especially in rural communities. It creates capital for investing in a business, it creates capital for investing in housing, capital for investing in education, which, as we know, is becoming increasingly exorbitant. You know, as a young person myself, I recognize how out of control our housing costs have become, how out of control student loan debt has become. I've got my fair share of student loan debt. And so that's one area I think that we need to be proactive about, preparing our generation to compete with the economy of today and tomorrow. So children's savings account, baby bonds, however you'd like to call it, that is a policy that I'm very proud of, that other states have implemented, like Nevada, which is a very rural community in a lot of areas. And that would be a policy that I would like to pursue.
Great, thank you, Colton. Dan, you'll have 30 seconds to finish up on it if you would like.
Anytime you can do tax-free savings, I'm absolutely up on that. And so those are awesome ideas. However, when it comes to the growth and the cost of housing and the cost of doing business and the ability to locate businesses within Mason County, the thing that's really crippling us is the Growth Management Act. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. So with that, we'll move into the questions that you, our candidates, have prepared for one another. The time on this will change a little bit, so whomever the question is for will have 90 seconds to respond. The person who's asking the question will then have 30 seconds to restate or clarify the question, and then a final 30 seconds from the questioner. So with that, this first question will be from Dan. Colton's prepared this question for you. And that is, the United Nations has called for a global ban on conversion therapy on LGBTQ+ youth, stating it has not only been debunked by the scientific community as ineffective, but that it is discriminatory and is repeatedly linked to long-lasting psychological harm. Yet in 2018, you voted against banning this practice. Why did you vote this way? You have 90 seconds to respond.
Oh, thank you, Colton, so much for asking the question. Sometimes you want to be able to remove your vote. On this one, it was a missed vote. I have since been educated on what the LGBTQ community has been put through on those therapies. When we looked through it, it looked like there was a limit on parents being able to take their kids who were confused or they thought were confused to at least to a counselor to at least do some talk therapy. I was wrong. I was wrong on that vote. And conversion therapy is wrong, and it's torture, and I do not support in any way, shape, or form torture. Thanks for asking the question, Colton.
Thank you. Colton, you'll have 30 seconds to reiterate or respond.
Thank you, Heidi. I appreciate the representative's apology. I appreciate that he admits he was wrong, and I appreciate when people can adapt. I will just say I wish that he had listened to our community and to the facts back when he had it readily available to him in 2018, when American Psychologists Association went before the legislature and said it's ineffective. You know, I'm a gay man. I have had many of my friends put through this dangerous practice and have seen the implications of it firsthand. Again, I appreciate his apology, but I wish that he had acted sooner on that.
Thank you, Colton. Dan, in 30 seconds for any last thoughts on the matter?
Yeah, absolutely. Conversion therapy is torture. It should be banned worldwide. However, we know torture happens. Torture is not okay with me. I've been a man who's done everything I can to help people in my entire life, and conversion therapy is terrible. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Colton, this next question has been prepared for you by Dan. You have 90 seconds to respond. And the question is, do you support defunding law enforcement? If so, at what level? And if not, then why?
Well, thank you for this question, Dan. This is actually a really personal question for me. I have a brother who's a local law enforcement sergeant in Kitsap County, and I also have a brother-in-law who is Black. I love both of them. I can love both of them. And I can still demand accountability from an institution in many ways that we know the facts on in terms of persecuting Black lives and Black bodies. Because the reality is, and I say this, with an open heart, my brother gets to take off his burden when he takes off his badge. My brother-in-law gets up, gets his 2 children ready, goes to bed as a Black man in America, which we know in many instances in many communities can be a death sentence. I think there are tangible steps that we can take because I know law enforcement has a tough job. My brother's a law enforcement officer. He's been a law enforcement officer for years. We need to respect the work that they're doing and we need to give them leverage. Part of that is we need to be investing better in our mental health crises. That is just abhorrent. It's shameful that we don't invest in that, but I also think there are tangible steps to work together to come up with some accountability metrics and areas of opportunity, bringing together civil rights organizations like the NAACP, bringing together local law enforcement, and working to develop tangible ways to identify accountability measures. Some of those ideas are, fairly basic to take in terms of making public misconduct records, or, for example, making it so that law enforcement officers who are disbanded can't just get back in through the appeals process.
Thank you, Colton. Dan, you have 30 seconds to clarify or to respond.
Well, that last statement that he made, I absolutely agree with him on, and I agree with most of what he was talking about. I do not support defunding police because in my service, helping victims of sexual assault, as much as I had trying to end the statute of limitations on felony sex crimes, monsters will be monsters, and monsters need to have people chasing them down and protecting them from society. We have taken many reform steps in Washington State, the removal of malice before an officer can be charged, the ethnic diversity, and...
Thank you, Dan. Colton, you have 30 seconds if you wish to make any final remarks.
Thank you, Heidi. What I will say is this, Mr. Griffey talks about tough on crime, monsters will be monsters, but what he still has not posited or said, and I've watched him very carefully in some of his interviews, is he still refuses to say Black Lives Matter. It's not difficult to say, and they don't have to be at odds with supporting law enforcement in various degrees. We have a crisis of persecuting Black lives. It's not just in the urban centers, it's in our rural communities too, and I wish that the representative would stand with them.
Thank you, Colton. Dan, this next question has been prepared for you by Colton, and that is, many of your firefighter colleagues are on the front lines of this historic wildfire season. While forest management certainly plays a role, do you believe that climate change is intensifying these fires? And what is your plan to address this climate crisis? You have 90 seconds to respond.
Can you hear me now? Sorry. Thank you, Colton, for the question. Climate change is absolutely affecting our ability to fight wildfires, mostly with our reservoir storages. However, forest practices since the spotted owl have been decimated, and the way the forest used to be managed is, most people don't know this, but because I'm a firefighter, I do. The Olympic Peninsula used to burn from Olympia to Port Angeles about every 200 years. It renewed the forest, and the forest was then very resilient. But now that we're very populated in Washington State, we can't let that happen. So we absolutely have to work with our forest management partners to harvest and replant, because that is the best way to sequester carbon, is to have new trees that are babies sucking up carbon in the atmosphere. So thank you for the question, Colton.
Thank you, Dan. Colton, you'll now have 30 seconds to clarify or respond.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the representative acknowledges climate change exists and that it's here. And I think it's very tangible in our communities. Climate change has been shown to disproportionately impact rural communities like Mason County in particular. It hurts our local businesses as well. You know, recently I heard from Congressman Kilmer that our business Taylor Shellfish had to shift some of its resources because coastal acidification. Our representatives need to be mindful of climate change, and our representatives need to be taking tangible steps that mitigate the climate change crisis for this generation and the next.
Thank you. Dan, you have 30 seconds for any final thoughts on the matter.
Yeah, well, absolutely. It's how we do it. Right now, a very overburdensome government picking winners and losers is slowing down our ability to sequester carbon, and that is undeniable. I'll just give you a compact fluorescent light bulb as an example. We had to set up a whole waste refuse buyback system because the government endorsed one technology instead of letting the innovators free to innovate. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Colton, this next question's been prepared for you by Dan, and that is, what does an environmentally friendly power generation system in Washington State look like to you? You have 90 seconds to respond.
Thank you, Heidi, and thank you for the question, Dan. I think we need to be working very carefully with our local business leaders and bringing our stakeholders to the table with our environmental groups to develop what a green energy future looks like. We have a lot of potential to bring green energy jobs to Mason County, but I also have talked to local labor who is worried, of course, about setting too high of regulatory standards for our environment that makes it difficult for them to transition. I hear them. And I want to work with them, and I have told them that I will work with them in terms of bringing people to the table. That's something that I'm very proud of being able to do. You know, just as an example, I worked right here in Mason County during my capstone project to develop a strategic framework plan for the opioid epidemic. I worked with people from our county commissioners to our local law enforcement to our firefighters to our healthcare officials. I am someone who builds coalitions, who solves problems, and I want to work together with those people to build a clean energy future, because I do agree that we have a lot of potential to bring green energy jobs, green energy livable union jobs into Mason County, into our communities, which is, as I mentioned, economically depressed. And I think that as we look towards building a future, a green energy future, that we need to be looking at ways in which we can collaborate to find clean energy solutions and power generation systems that you know, mitigate this crisis and also help our communities adapt to the crises at hand.
Thank you, Colton. Dan, you have 30 seconds to clarify or respond.
Yeah, hydroelectric power must be recognized as renewable in Washington State. It is the most renewable resource that we have. Our windmills are not renewable. As a matter of fact, they are a toxic refuse stream. And battery, you look at, we are subjugating third world countries, mining cobalt and all those other things to build stuff. And it's all because government is forcing technologies instead of doing the deliberative and calculated work to.
Thank you, Dan. Colton, you have 30 seconds for final remarks.
Well, yes, I mean, I completely agree that we need to be working with our stakeholders to come up with green energy solutions. I routinely recognize that our rural communities often don't have a voice at the table, which is why representation matters. And I hope that when we finally have a representative back in the majority party, we can take steps to bring our environmental groups, to bring our labor groups together, to bring clean energy jobs into Mason County, because I believe that that is a real area of opportunity that's going to build economic mobility for our residents.
Thank you, Colton. Dan, this question has been prepared for you. You'll have 90 seconds to respond. The question is, Washington has the most regressive tax system in the United States, where low income and working people pay a greater share of their income in taxes than the wealthiest Washingtonians. What measures have you supported to level the playing field to ensure that wealthy Seattle billionaires are paying their fair share?
Thank you, Colton, for the question. The Washington State Constitution does not support income tax. The voters have continuously turned down income tax. The next best thing is a tax system where we don't tax food, we don't tax medical supplies. And when I hear that it's the most regressive tax, and you can see on charts that it is, and you can also see that The individual gets to choose in Washington state a lot of the time whether they pay taxes or not. They get to choose if they buy expensive cars, or they get to choose if they buy a used vehicle. I support our current system, and I have championed across the board property tax reductions in Washington state. We championed using our $4 billion surplus to reduce our state portion of the property taxes. This last legislative session, the majority party railroaded through $4 billion in new spending and nearly $4 billion of excess spending, so almost $8 billion. So those are the things I've done, and that's what I believe. And thank you, Colton, so much for the question.
Thank you, Dan. Colton, you have 30 seconds to clarify or respond.
Thank you, Heidi. I think it's really characteristic and important to note that he said he supports our current system. As we can see during this pandemic, this current system is working really great for the wealthiest. It's been about a K-curved recovery. Jeff Bezos has made billions in this state while working families continue to pay an overburdened share of our tax code. We need tax relief. We need tax reform. Unfortunately, my opponent is taking money directly from corporations like Amazon and Boeing, and I just don't see him taking steps to level the playing field.
Thank you, Colton. Dan, you have 30 seconds for any final remarks.
Yeah, I do not put a maximum amount of income on people. I do not put a maximum amount of wealth or earnings potential. We are a free country, and the free country we should cherish and champion those that become millionaires and billionaires because they invest massively in our economy. But the little person in Washington state under sales tax version of tax gets to choose what taxes they pay or if they pay taxes. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Colton, this next question has been prepared for you by Dan, and that is, how does the modern timber industry in Mason County affect the environment and the economy? Can the two thrive and coexist together? You have 90 seconds.
Thank you, Heidi, and thank you, Dan, for that question. I do believe they can thrive and coexist together. You know, I have an uncle who actually works in the timber industry. What I will say, of course, is kind of what I reiterated in the previous question about the environment, which was we need to be working with our stakeholders to, create an economy that doesn't leave out our, businesses that have been part of our communities for decades. I mean, the city of Shelton and Mason County has built themselves as a timber community. And unfortunately, as we saw with a lot of the effects on that, our community is suffering economically. And so we need to be able to help those workers that are currently in the timber industry and support them. And I also believe, again, as I reiterated in my previous question, that we can work together to help bring in clean energy jobs, to work with our stakeholders already at the table, and to work with people in the timber industry as well to protect their workforce, understand the dignity of their workforce, and find ways to build up our economy together.
Thank you, Colton. Dan, you have 30 seconds to clarify or respond.
Yeah, thank you, Heidi, and thank you, Colton, for the answer. Our forest jobs, everybody that works in the forest positively affects our environment. The recent study by the Forest Protection Association shows that the Doug fir at about 65 years slows down its carbon absorption. If we want to fix the environment, we want to affect carbon, the best way is to put carbon sinks in or carbon absorbing materials in. And the best way to do that is plant new trees and use the
Thank you, Dan. I believe that concludes the questions that you have prepared for one another. So with that, we will move into closing statements. You will each have 2 minutes to give your final statements. And with that, Dan, you will be first.
Thank you, Heidi, and thank you again to the Chamber, and thank you for Colton for sitting through this. I'm a lifelong resident of the district. I'm a professional firefighter. My life is service, and it has always been service. I am running again to continue to serve you. I've been characterized by my opponent as anti-labor. That's not true. And I've been characterized by my opponent as anti-environment, which couldn't be further from the truth. However, with all of that being said, I'm going to continue to work on supporting those that suffer sexual violence in Washington State. I'm working on a bill that would make it illegal to groom kids by knowingly showing them pornographic material. I could not get a hearing from the majority party last year. This year, we're going to do the same thing that we did with our statute of limitations bill. When we couldn't get the majority party to move it or hear the bill, we went to the press and they really quickly moved on that. So I'm going to continue to work on those. I'm also going to work on regulatory relief for our businesses and a lower flattened curve business and occupation tax. And I'm working as soon as we get the state businesses open and running again, a tax break for everyone in Washington State by trying to lower the property tax, the state property tax that every Washingtonian pays. With that, thanks again to the Chamber for this forum. Thanks again to Colton, and I look forward to seeing both of you in the future.
Thank you, Dan. Colton, you'll now have 2 minutes for your closing statement also.
Thank you, Heidi. Thank you, Dan, the Chamber, and everyone who has tuned in. I just want to say very, very quickly as well, the record is there. You can look at his record on labor, and you can look at his record on the environment. He has about a 12–14% lifetime voting record from the Washington Conservation voters on environmental policy. What I will say is what I said in the beginning. I mean what I say, and I will use my policy background to vote based on evidence and not be a rubber stamp for my political caucus. My opponent has routinely created an image of being someone who works across the aisle, who's in our corner, who believes we're stronger together. But if you look at the record, it's simply at odds with what he says. He's routinely voted against working families, voting against paid family medical leave, raising the minimum wage, improving collective bargaining agreements. He's undermined the diversity of our community, voting against more than 1,500 DACA dreamers in our community. And again, while I appreciate his apology on conversion therapy, he still cast that vote. And he's voted consistently with his party, even on widely bipartisan legislation, including uninterrupted rest and meal breaks for our nurses and frontline hospital caregivers, who we know are vitally essential during this pandemic. I'm running because I care about this community. This community is my home. It instilled in me the values that bring me here today. As I mentioned, I believe firmly that we have been left behind and taken for granted. And I'm hoping to bring my lived experience, my political policy experience, and my personal professional experience to bring necessary change in our community, to bring economic mobility and recovery to a community that has been left behind, to bring in good livable wage jobs, to finally fund our public rural education and special education, and to improve our healthcare access and outcomes, including our telehealth and our behavioral health services. I'm running in this race because I believe truly that we are stronger together. And I'm humbly asking for your support to help us bring in a new generation of leadership. Thank you.
Thank you, Colton. This concludes our forum for the 35th Legislative District, Position 1. I wish, well, thank you both for participating, and I wish you both the best of luck. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Heidi.